I went from no art in February of 2021 to now I think I have like 150 pieces.
That's Aisha Selden, a collector who's moved with so much intention and so much direction that leads her to her curiosity, which leads her to conviction. She went from owning no art in February of 2021 to building this collection of more than 150 works in just a few years. Now for Aisha, collecting isn't about the status. It's about the purpose, supporting artists directly, introducing them to curators and collectors, and making sure the ladder she climbed is never pulled up behind her. Aisha's story reminds us that you don't need to come from the art world to make an impact in it. Actually, most people that do don't come from this space. She collects with heart and strategy, asking not just what can I own, but who can I uplift?
The art market is an unregulated industry, and there is a certain type of pipeline, and when these artists go down that pipeline and they have certain types of supporters and you follow the money trail, you can really get a pretty good indicator as to where that artist is going to be in, say, 5 to 6 years.
And Richard Beavers, founder of Richard Beavers Gallery in Brooklyn, established in 2007 to amplify Black artists and communities. His gallery has become a national force, bridging emerging voices in major institutions while also redefining what access looks like in contemporary art. He's building the infrastructure that keeps culture alive. Richard's work and his dedication to it reminds us that representation requires infrastructure. The galleries, the collectors, the advocates, they're all a part of the system. Now that's what GloryLand was built for, not just to talk about art, but to show how power and community move through it. If you're taking notes, this is where you write down. Build the table, don't wait for an invitation, because that's what every single one of these people have done.
One should never buy art to get rich, but I do think that art should be a part of everyone's asset allocation.
Now this is Lester Marks, one of Houston's most influential art patrons, named among Art and Antiques' top 100 collectors and Art News's top 200. His home is often featured in national press and shared with more than 100,000 followers on Instagram. Lester's been recognized time and time for his patronage, and he's known for championing artists long before the market catches on. Lester is proof that collecting can be an act of leadership. When you open your home and your platform to emerging voices, you're shaping history in real time. What's going on, y'all? I'm Mariah Elise, and this is Dear Glory. What you're about to hear is not just a panel. We don't do just panels over here. It's a conversation between some of the sharpest minds shaping the art world today. Aisha Selden, Lester Marks, and Richard Beavers. They all sat down with me during GloryLand, and the gems that came out of this talk could have easily stayed behind closed doors, but they graciously and generously gave them to us. They spoke with the kind of honesty and insight that usually happens when the cameras are not rolling, about wealth, about power, and about legacy, and what it really means to invest in art, invest in culture, and invest in yourself. This one is powerful. I want to encourage you guys to watch the entire thing. And if you need to pause it, that's fine. But make sure you come back, because this is one you're going to want to take notes on. I promise you that. You have one of the craziest, most beautiful, most eclectic collections I've ever seen. And I think if anyone in this room has ever seen his collection, I think we can all agree, right? Okay. And you've spent a long time building this collection. I want to know from you, what has it meant over the years for you to gain the wealth of knowledge that you've gained from interacting in your interactions through art?
Before I reply, I just want to say I am so damn glad to get out of that convention hall because I wasn't sure if I was building wealth or going bankrupt. And I'm also very excited that we have two great events occurring in Houston, Texas. We have the Untitled Art Fair, and by the way, speaking of wealth, I'll tell you how much money comes into the Miami economy from Art Basel every year, and that number is $5 billion with a B. And I'm just very excited that we have Untitled here. And my other accolades go to really and truly one of my very favorite people that I've ever met in the art world is Mariah Elise. And when I want to learn something, I go to her YouTube channel. I've learned more from this woman right here than I've learned from anyone else in the art world. So if you don't mind, let's give her a hand. I've been wanting her to put me on YouTube, but, you know, she's working towards me. I had to beg to get on this panel.
Oh.
Well, in answer to your question, art has completely changed my life. It has made me the person that I am today. It has made me the person that wears a sport coat like this, that wears shoes like this. In other words, art to me is not just something that you put on your walls. Art is about ideas. And I feel like when I have the opportunity to live day by day, year after year, and I must say decade after decade, with the art collection that I've been fortunate enough to build, I feel, to use a word of Mariah's, I feel glorious. To be surrounded by something that is bigger than myself is very special. I'm just a little shrimpy guy. You know, I grew up as an outsider with curly hair in a small country town. No one ever thought that I would mature into an art collector. And if they had have thought I was going to mature into an art collector, it would have been Western art, of which I don't collect. But so from my roots, and I hope I'm not taking too long, from an early age, from the time I was a freshman in college, I started collecting art. I feel I was born with an eye for art. Now, it's the difficult part, and I'm going to finish on this, the difficult part that it's taken me so long to learn is exactly which artists to follow, which works of art to follow, how much to pay for them, and where do I find what's most exciting to me, the emerging artist.
Thank you so much, Lester. And Aisha, the first conversation that we've had, we went to lunch. We were at lunch for 4 hours, maybe 5. And you asked some of the most intentional questions about artists that you were interested in. You told me some of the most intentional things. You have, and Dr. Joy, you're going to remember this from earlier today, she has intention, you have intention, and you have direction. And you're someone who fights for your artists that you collect. And you haven't been in this journey long. So what I want to know from you is, and we're sticking to wealth, how has becoming a collector, outside of building finances, how has that been a wealth building tool for you emotionally and personally?
So I would say, well, first, speaking of wealth, if anyone from California state of tax revenue is listening, I am, in fact, a Texas Houston resident. I am,
Okay, so-
I am a Texan. I got a license to prove it and an apartment. Howdy neighbors. So, I am a new collector. I think certainly the newest collector here in this panel. Thank you so much, Mariah, for extending the invitation to have conversation. I am truly just fascinated. I am thoroughly just curious, I think. I love talking to artists. Like, if I'm in a room of collectors or patrons, I'll find an artist in the room and just get a quiet space, and I just want to know about them. I want to know about their practice, and because I have limited means, I think, like most people, I think, I hone in on a few collectors, and I think some of the intentionality. I didn't start with. I was kind of like, bang, bang, I want every art, So I think I went from no art in February of 2021 to now I think I have like 150 pieces, which is like not very intentional at first, but at some point I pivoted to, one, no wall space, so two, having to make the decision about like, what is this philosophy? And I heard a collector, because I listen to art podcasts, and when I do something, I want to do it, the best possible way. So I was listening to Pamela Joyner on a podcast, and one of the things she talked about was your art philosophy. What is your philosophy? Do you have it in writing? Do you even know what it is? Right. So the first step in me taking steps to become an intentional collector and patron was sitting down and figuring out what that philosophy was, and I put it in writing. I asked myself, like, what exactly is it that I expect to get out of collecting? And more importantly, how are you supporting the most important part of this ecosystem, which it's the artists, right? So are you doing this just because you want to beat out another collector because you got the A word, or are you doing this? And certainly not to say that everything that we do as collectors is altruistic, but certainly making sure that in my process, because I hope to be doing this for a very long time, that I am putting first and being very intentional about supporting the artists. It's more than just putting art on my walls. How am I supporting them? By introducing them to curators, introducing them to other collectors, by acquiring works and donating it to museums, all of which I've done in in 4 years. So that's important. And certainly I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging a lot of the folks that helped me very early on. Dr. Joy, who's in the room, has been she's like the LA art godmother, right? It took folks like Dr. Joy who would put us on invite lists, and she would make sure that we got access, and she would just make sure that museums or galleries knew who we were, so that we could have some of these conversations. So those folks, and Dee Carrison, there were a number of collectors in LA that kind of, because sometimes these, I guess, fancy worlds can be very gatekeepy. So it's important not just as a collector to do for self, but also make sure that you're tossing the ladder back down.
Right.
So
right. I think that was an amazing answer, and you brought up so many wonderful points. And Richard, you speak from the total opposite of what these two speak from. I'm sure that you are a collector and you do collect, but being in conversation with two collectors, you are a gallerist, and so you sit on the opposite side of that conversation. So when you're involved in the conversation of wealth, which you're well versed in, and folks come into your gallery and they want to know one or two things, they want you to guide them to what they love, or they want you to guide them towards investment. How do you navigate that conversation?
First and foremost, I'd like to say thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Really pleased to be on a panel with you, Aisha, and Lester, two collectors who have supported my program. For me, it really began with my passion for art, and wanting to share that passion with my community, which is in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, which was an underserved community when it came to the arts, and to make art more accessible. And also seeing that there was a need in the market where I just didn't see artists who were being given an opportunity where their work was speaking to the Black experience that I was seeing on a daily basis in my community. When I first opened a gallery in Brooklyn, people were really surprised. And I literally had people come up to me and say, why would you open a gallery in this neighborhood? And I remember being a young person and my mother taking me to galleries. We always had to leave outside of our community. We had to go to Manhattan. And I would think about all of the other young people who were my age. I was around 13 years old that didn't have accessibility to art, and how uplifting and inspiring and motivational art was for me, and how transformative it was. So for me, that was the beginning of opening the gallery, is wanting to share that passion and using art as a catalyst to evoke conversation. So when people come in, we don't have a buzzer on the door. We keep the door open. We make it a very welcoming environment, and we invite people to come in, and we talk to them about art. We talk to them about the importance of art. And first and foremost, you gravitate towards what speaks to you. You know, for me, the investment is a personal investment, a cultural investment, and way down the road, some sort of monetary investment. You know, but you begin with the cultural significance of the work itself, and it's speaking to us having that presence within the art community. The other thing I would say is that a lot of times going into a gallery, particularly for people of color, is something that can be intimidating. You know, so I always make certain that our space is a space where they feel comfortable coming into. And we have the artists there to meet with them and to talk to them and to delve into their practice. And it's the connection aspect of it, because we really should be the major stakeholders and decision makers when it comes to our cultural assets.
Absolutely. And this question is for Lester. What do you think it means to, as a collector, to add to cultural wealth before you add to your own financial wealth?
Before I answer that, I want to add one thing that, speaking of building wealth through the arts, one way to do that is to serve on a panel, because I want to thank Mariah for her overly generous $50,000 speaking fee.
I hope everyone bought a ticket. If you did.
What was that question again?
I don't even know, Lester.
Well,
So my question was to you, before you build financial wealth, before you think about the long game, the end game, there's the short game. There's, I just love this. I just want to live with this. And when you do that, you're building cultural wealth. So I want you to speak a little bit to how important that is and what that journey actually looks like from you, for you, going from the beginning, the ideation of saying, okay, I love this work. And as it grows with you and with your collection and it becomes financially valuable, what does that journey actually look like?
It's a little bit of a tee off of my last answer. I began, like anyone else, just buying a piece of art. And once you have a piece of art, you're a collector. And as the years went on, well, maybe I should back up. I guess I've always been a very sensitive guy. I've always been attracted to the arts from an early age. I started with writing and performing poetry around Houston when I was 13. I never learned to play a musician, but I've managed a couple of bands. And from there, I segued into art. And I'll never forget the first time that I fell in love with art. And I pulled into the parking lot of a gallery, which is no longer here in Houston, New Gallery. And from my car, through the windows of the gallery, I saw a Larry Bell exhibition. It was glass cubes, if you're familiar with Larry's work. And in that moment, I knew in my heart that I was going to become a collector. It doesn't happen that way for everyone. It doesn't happen that way for most. But for me, it was a knee-jerk reaction. From as I began to acquire art, and I felt a power not coming from me, a power coming from the artist to live with greatness. It can't be overestimated. And I beseech all of you, and I'm probably singing to the choir, but acquire a work of art. There's art for every budget. And I'll tell you that, yes, while I have, quote unquote, a collection of blue chip art, let me tell you about my last 4 pieces. $250, $450, $2,500. So just because I have a quote unquote blue chip collection, depending on what your definition of blue chip is, if your definition of blue chip is $1 million and above, I'm not a blue chip collector. I may have pieces in that price range, but I assure you they were not at that price range when I first purchased them. And that phases a little bit more directly into Mariah's question, in that I do believe that one should never buy art to get rich. But I do think that art should be a part of everyone's asset allocation. 5–10% is quite reasonable. I'm a little bit crazy, okay? So, but has that answered?
Yeah. Yes, I think it actually does answer the question. Actually, giving that answer of 5 to 10%, I think is extremely valuable. I think that's something that folks need to know. And the next question I want to ask is to you, Richard, because you speak often about this. When there is an artist and a collector is interested in, how do you actually, what ecosystem does it take to build value within an artist and their artwork?
Wow. The ecosystem, it starts with the gallery. You know, for me, it's identifying an artist early in their career and providing them with artist development and the resources that they need. One of the things we do is we bring in a writer, because a lot of times artists can visualize what it is that they want to create, but to actually take what they're seeing inside their mind and transferring that onto canvas or paper can sometimes be really difficult for them. So language really gives them the context that they need to be able to give them the direction to really open up and transfer what it is that they're thinking and to create it into the actual artwork. So that's one of the steps that we take. Another aspect of it is it's just a platform. You know, it goes a long way when someone believes in you and you feel the support that really encourages artists to be able to go into the studio and to create the work. One of the things that I've done, and I've been able to because the gallery has scaled up and I'm in the financial position to do that, many times I may just commission an artist to do, say, 5 to 10 works. So this way they don't have to worry about sources of revenue, and they have the money now to be able to cover their studio costs. I even may purchase canvas for them so they don't have to worry about purchasing canvas and the supplies that they need, so they can just primarily focus and go into the studio and create the work. Because of the reputation that we've built, we're able to pre-sell work, you know, so that we identify the collectors that we really would like to place the works with them. And this is where the importance of a collector comes in, because as Aisha was saying earlier, and Lester himself, where they've now become advocates for these artists. And not only are they acquiring the work and just hanging it on their walls, but they're speaking about these artists in their circles and amongst their network. So now they're opening them up and opening their practice up to a larger audience. And hopefully those individuals will become collectors. I also look for individuals that sit on museum boards, trustees members, curators, aligning a curator to maybe come in and curate a show for that artist, or have that artist's work included in a group show that that curator may be participating in, because that works well on their CV. And once again, it's all about building the confidence. We do a tremendous amount of programming. We have conversations in the gallery, which is these in-depth, up-close personal conversations with creatives, where we record the artist in conversation with the curator of that particular show. Art fairs is another thing that's really important, because now you're introducing the artist to, in many instances, to a international marketplace. Yeah. So last year when we participated in Miami Art Week, we now do 2 fairs simultaneously. We do Scope, which is a fair that is more so known for emerging artists. So we'll feature an emerging or younger artist from our program in the booth at Scope. Sometimes it's a solo presentation. Last year was Lynthia Edwards. And then we also do Untitled Miami. And Untitled Miami is more of a premium type of fair. So that particular booth would be for a more established artist. So start off with group show, eventually begin to build an interest and a market in the artist's work, and then they eventually have a solo presentation, and then we begin to introduce the work through the art fairs.
I want you to go a little bit deeper into the CV. I get this question more than I get any other question. So many artists don't know how, or the importance it is of building their actual CV, and a lot of collectors don't know how to glance at a CV and know where an artist may be in their career. And so if you could, from your perspective, from a gallerist perspective, talk about the importance of a CV and what it actually takes to build one that lands you in a gallery. So
in most cases, the artists that we work with don't even come with CVs. Because these are emerging artists that in many instances have never even exhibited anywhere. And that's really where my niche is at, is to just see these gems, identify them early, and put our resources behind them. So it's the gallery's responsibility to then begin to build out the CV. So the CV could be something as simple as, starting off in a group show. And the group show is important because, as I said earlier, we're now introducing that artist and putting the work out there for collectors to be able to see.
Yeah. And Aisha, you spoke about early in your collecting journey, getting artists that you are supporting, that you are advocating for into into museums, into institutions. That is beyond one of the most important things you can do for an artist. That builds up their CV. And once you start to see these institutional placements, these shows that they're in these public collections, our private collections and institutions, it changes the mindset of folks that are looking at their CV. It changes the mindset of folks that are looking at their practice, honestly, in general, for many people, for many collectors. How has that become something that you've become such an advocate for and also so strong at?
I feel like as the art market changes, right, and it's, you can call it slow down, you can call it cyclical, whatever you want to call it, it certainly evolved and changed from where it was just a few short years ago. I feel like the CV just becomes far more important, right? Particularly I spent a lot of time at our home in Los Angeles, and there's LA-based artists where, they're like, this work is 80,000 or 100,000, and I'm like, well, let me see your CV. And it's like, they're like, well, I'm in the collection of Susan Sarandon. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what does that got to do with anything? But congratulations, I'm sure she's lovely. So it's like, you meet these artists and, these prices, and I feel like maybe it's like Hollywood money that, they've just kind of driven your prices up. So as collectors, I want to see how many solo shows have you done? How many group shows have you done? It's totally okay if you're self-taught, but if not, did you go to school? Where'd you study? Where'd you learn your craft? And a part of my art philosophy, and this is just something that's important to me, I'm very interested in lineage painting, right? And what that means for me is, if y'all know the book of Genesis, where it's like, this person begat that person begat that person, like that's how I think about painting. So I think about some of my favorite artists, right, who are, just work I can't afford. I would absolutely love the Monet that is at the Met when you're walking past to the Contemporary. I would love that. It's not going to happen. So when I start thinking about Monet and what was important to him, Alma Thomas, the Alma Thomas at the Met is probably the best thing I think, I've seen, and it's, I'm sure, worth millions of dollars. So when I think about Monet and Alma, and then I think about what is it that I love about these painters, and I can be a bit dense when it comes to creative things. I've been in financial services for 25 years, so my mind thinks very much about numbers. And I remember looking at a painting of an emerging artist, and I'm like, I don't know why I love this painting. And my partner, Devin, she said, that's because he's using the same like bluish green that Monet uses, and you love that color. And I'm like, oh, so when that finally clicked for me, I started thinking, okay, who are some emerging artists that are not trying to replicate Alma Thomas or replicate Monet or replicate Sam Gilliam or some of my favorite painters, but what are they doing to master some of the things that they mastered? How are they adding to that conversation? So trying to identify those artists first that are of that lineage, honing in on the particular artist and then supporting them as I can. I remember I acquired a work. I was actually having a conversation just a few minutes ago about a Lindsay Adams work that I acquired. And I acquired multiple works from her solo show at Sean Kelly, and I said I'm going to buy one and I'm going to donate one to a museum. And I had no idea what museum I was going to donate it to. I literally calling museums like, hey, I have this wonderful work. And I got a job. Like, I actually do have a very busy schedule. But I'm like, I am so vested in her career and what she's doing as a colorist. I will make sure that I can do whatever I can to ensure that she does however I can, whatever small role I can play. And then when she, if she's ever worth, anything, I guess from a financial standpoint, the very small role I played, and we ended up placing the work. It's official, but she hasn't announced it yet, so I can't say what institution ended up taking it. But it's a tier 1 museum that. Just me as a small collector pushing for this artist, I think just, kind of helps her get to that next level. And that's important to me as a patron and collector.
And I just want to say that is literally what this panel is about. Don't just buy art, build wealth. You're building the wealth within the work. And I want you guys to go a little bit deeper on, and this is for you, Lester, because there is also a danger, and this is a bit provocative, in seeing an artwork that's overpriced when it's early. What does that do for you as a collector? And I want you to answer that as candidly as you can, because I know there are artists in the room, and I think it's one of the most important things for them to know, to price their work appropriately so that it can value up, so that it doesn't remain stagnant, so that they don't have to say, well, this isn't selling, let me deduct, let me go a little bit less expensive. What does it do for you as a collector when you view an emerging artist's work and it's priced too high?
Well, actually, I think you've almost answered the question yourself. When an artist is beginning, I feel like they need to know the landscape that they're working in. What type of environment are they in? What are other artists pricing their work that have a comparable experience, that are doing similar types of work? I often find that artists by nature are somewhat introverted, perhaps overly generalized statement, but I think it's important as an artist. Can I have a show of hands of how many of you are artists? Okay, good, excellent. That you network. Here in Houston, there's a wonderful organization for emerging artists called the Visual Arts Alliance. I frequently host events for them because only by commingling, artists commingling with each other, do they begin to have an idea of where their pricing should be. Because if you start too high, as Mariah said, it looks pretty schlocky when you start dropping your price by 50%. And so dialogue and interaction with other artists, you need to make the rounds, you need to be going to the galleries, you need to be going to the pop-up art shows like Mariah is having tomorrow. You need to avail yourself of all the myriad of opportunities out there and pay attention to what types of prices that you're seeing. A little bit off the question, but I just want to throw something out there, since there were a lot of hands that went up as artists. When you're signing your work, make sure you sign it in a way that is legible. I cannot tell you how many works that I own that I no longer know who the artist was. You know, you think you're real fancy with... Well, don't do that. Someplace on that work, on the front or the back, print your damn name. Another thing related to, in an offhand way, to the pricing of the work. Well, that's enough. That's enough. Let me let someone else speak.
I was so scared of this, Lester. I know Lester very well.
Yeah, I tend to say what's on my mind.
So, Aisha, I actually want to ask you the same question. How does it affect you when you may be interested in an artist and you see their work and it doesn't make sense for you? And it also doesn't make sense for the ecosystem that they've built around them. They haven't had shows. What does that do for you?
I mean, I think that's probably most of what I see. You know, I think, you know, call it art market bubble. You just see prices and the CV just aren't aligned. And I mean, I think, you know, it feels like I see that a lot in LA. And I think that, like, you know, as collectors, a lot of us have slowed down a bit, just to make sure that, you know, for me, now that I have this philosophy, I've got to ask myself, does what you're looking at and does what you like, does it align with your philosophy? So a part of what helped me, and this is probably before the art world slowed down a bit, I'd already slowed down because I'd have to ask myself that question every time. And I think I also heard another collector say, you know, these are my rules, so I get to break my own rules, and I certainly have done that. You know, if I'm standing in front of a painting, and that's whether or not it aligns with my philosophy, or sometimes it just doesn't make sense, but if my heart starts beating and I can't stop thinking about that painting, I'll get the painting. But that's how I want to feel about every single painting. If I can have both, this fits within my philosophy, and like my heart races when I see that piece, that's even better. But I think that, you know, as collectors, we are paying attention. We're certainly making sure that the price aligns with what we're seeing on the CV, what's out there in the market. I don't think any of us have really talked about the fact that there is a secondary market, which makes, I won't say value public, but we get to see, it's hard to, as a collector, I see what the primary prices are, and there's not really much happening at some of the larger auction houses that I'm not aware of. But if like me, I am a student of what I'm in. I've spent a lot of money on art, so I'm actually paying attention to what's happening out there. So I know exactly if I go into a gallery and they're like, well, the price is this, and I'm like, I just saw a piece sell for $1,500 last week. It's tough to justify. Yeah. So. So a lot of things aren't really making sense right now, but I also get we're doing this to support artists as well. So sometimes it's not going to make sense, and you walk away. Sometimes it's not going to make sense, and you're doing it to support the ecosystem too.
And then I wanted to ask you, Richard, along the same question, because what do you do when it comes to you? Are you focusing on readjusting the price? How do you handle that when you see an artist that you absolutely love, if they're not at that early emerging stage and you see that they're priced too high, maybe their work has gone into some collections, but you want to regulate it? How do you handle that?
I don't work with them. No,
I think that's a great answer.
And because I can't stand behind the value of the work. So once again, emerging artists is really my sweet spot, because we can really pave out the path for them. And it's really critical, especially for young artists, is the pricing of your work, because you can immediately price yourself out of the market. So we look at other artists that are comparable to them, where they are in their CV, and for me, we look to give the buyer or collector more for their money. Always give them more for their money, to the point where when an Aisha and when you come up, that you can't walk away from the work. That it just grabs you. The work is so strong. It speaks to you on a spiritual and emotional level that price isn't even a question. Because the one thing you can't do is you can't lower your prices. And then the artists I work with, we tend to price the work based off a square inch. So this way there's a consistency from various different sizes, and you don't see a work that's 16 by 20 priced at a certain point, and then a work that's 36 by 36 is 5 times more expensive. And then when a collector is looking at it, they're saying, well, those numbers just don't make sense to me.
How do you decide when it's time to go up?
Historically, what the work is sold for, the interest that's there, is the work selling on a consistent basis. But I'll say for like the last 2 years, we haven't raised any artist prices. And even when artists that come in initially working with us, and then we have dual representation where they may go on and work with another gallery, we advise the artists not to raise their prices.
And I want to stay here just for 1 second, because one of the first artists that you championed was Nathaniel Mary Quinn. And we spoke about that. And he has a show at Gagosian right now. And the trajectory of his career, going from probably, I don't know, how much were you selling his work for, if you don't mind even answering that? Crazy question, right?
No, I'll answer it. This is a safe space. So when I was working with Quinn early in his career, he lived 2 blocks from the gallery, so we would do a lot of studio visits. But you just know, like Lester said, I've been around art since I was 13 years old. I've developed the eye, and I know masterful work when I see it, and I know generational talent and the trajectory of an artist. So I would get as many collectors of color as I possibly can, and we would do studio visits. And early on, his works were priced from, say, between $5,000 to $25,000.
Now they're priced at...
That's a whole lot less than what I paid for mine.
I know it is. But the one thing about Quinn that I can say is that he has not overpriced his work. He is very consistent when it comes to understanding that he doesn't want to price himself out of the market, that he has his whole career. Like a lot of times artists, because their work may do really well in the secondary market, they think that that's an indicator that they should raise their prices on the primary market. And what you're finding now is a lot of those works that are coming back onto the market because of the market conditions, the estimates are less than what the works are selling for primary at the galleries.
I want to take it back because, Lester, I know you want something to add, so go ahead.
I just have to tell you a quick funny story, which is the antithesis of pricing artwork too high. I'm going to change the names to protect the guilty. Recently, there was an art dealer, we'll call her Betty, and she was representing an artist and was making a pitch to me through some thumbnails. And I said, Betty, you've got to be kidding me with this price. I mean, the CV, it just doesn't justify it. I don't understand. And then I called a friend of mine and I said, you're not going to believe what Betty is charging for this work. I said, it's just insane. Well, I walked into the gallery and I fell in love instantaneously and paid full price. So, sometimes your heart is more important than the price, and generally, I have a couple of examples that prove this. Well, I'll give you a specific. I bought a Kerry James Marshall, and when I bought it, I knew I was overpaying for it, but I loved it, and I got to meet Kerry, and he's one of the greatest artists ever, and the kindest guy I've ever met, and for years, I was kind of, I loved the work, but I was upset with myself because I knew I overpaid for it. Well, I've had it appraised recently, and 10 times. It's gone up in value 1,000%. And I was so sure I had overpaid for it. So don't be too quick to judge.
That's a great story. I didn't actually expect it to end that way, to where you were all the way up. But I wanted to explore because of language barriers, and I'm not sure who's in the room. And we're talking a lot, and we're talking to each other right here, like we understand each other. But we're throwing secondary market, primary market, art as an asset. I'm not even sure everyone actually understands what it means when it said art is an asset. And so, Aisha, if you could go into that.
I mean, I'm not even sure what it means, really, but I'm 25 years, I've been a private wealth advisor, and I'm used to traditional assets, right? It took me so long to get into art because I was buying stocks maybe my first decade, and then real estate. I was buying properties all around Philadelphia, and then it wasn't until I built my house in Philly where I just was looking around at windows and walls and said, I'm finally ready to get into art. So I think I have a very different perspective when it comes to assets and asset classes. But I think Lester's story is a great example of how art can absolutely operate and work as an asset class, right? I can't even think of very many publicly traded stocks that have gone up 1,000% in value, right? I mean, that's an Apple or Google type return, and even those are anomalies amongst publicly traded stocks. So, I've acquired artists, even just in 4 short years, where I got them very early, and even though maybe their price was low, or maybe my heart went pitter patter when I saw the art, and I've seen it even in a down market cycle appreciate. whether or not I would think about categorizing a certain percentage of someone's overall assets to art. I mean, I think that really just depends on how much you love it. I think I read somewhere that greater than 90% of art does not appreciate, right? So I think beginning with the idea that, and I think either Richard or Lester said, certainly we're not buying art or acquiring art thinking that it will appreciate, right? We're thinking of it as you stated earlier, as as a cultural asset, right? I primarily buy artists that are African American. I've got some artists from the continent or other countries, but I primarily focus on African American artists because that's very much a story that I'm just interested in. And if I can get just a snapshot of what was happening at that time, if I can get whether it's figuration or representational art or whether it's abstraction, that to me is wealth, right? I look around my house and I get to see the beauty of what people who have very similar stories to me or look like me, stories that were important to them, important to us as a people. So for me, that truly is wealth and an asset.
It definitely is. And Richard, is it important to you to see the artists that you work with, to see their work actually raise in financial value?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when we gave Bisa Butler her first solo show, works were priced between, I'd say the most expensive work was $6,000. We see what's happened for her. Genesis Tremaine, we gave her first 2 solo shows. You purchased the Genesis when we came here. Yeah, Genesis, a work on paper was $400. Canvas work was $3,200. That's not my primary goal, but there's a certain strategy that's put in place where you can definitely build the trajectory of an artist's career. Just making certain that you're not oversaturating the market with the work, kind of controlling that, seeing to it where the work is being placed, having conversations with collectors like Aisha, and having them acquire work and donate it to an institution. Like we've been really tremendously successful in that area, particularly for an African American art gallery. It's been extremely difficult for galleries like mine to be able to step into that particular space and be able to understand how to navigate that. And it's because we're also building wealth within our community. Just think about those early collectors who, entrusted me and purchased a Nathaniel Mary Quinn piece for $5,000. Now they have a work on their wall that's valued at $50,000 to $60,000, and this just talks into generational wealth. When I was first working with Quinn, I purchased 2 works from him. I worked at MTV for 12 years, and I didn't even know, I had a 401k, but I didn't even know I had a pension. And I got a letter in the mail, and the letter said that I had $25,000 in this pension, and they were changing providers, and I had an opportunity to pull that money out and not have to pay any penalty on it. So immediately I said, you know what, I'm going to invest in purchasing Nathaniel's work. And I was able to acquire 2 works, and those works now are estimated to be valued at anywhere from $350,000 to $400,000, and you're talking about 10 years ago. So it doesn't happen very often, and that's not the reason why you do it, but it can happen, and we have to keep in mind that the art market is an unregulated industry, and there is a certain type of pipeline, and when these artists go down that pipeline and they have certain types of supporters, and you follow the money trail, you can really get a pretty good indicator as to where that artist is going to be in, say, 5 to 6 years.
I think Richard is being a bit modest. Speaking of art as an asset, we all know what an asset is. It's something that can be exchanged for enumeration. I have been lucky enough, and I think all the collectors will share in this, that while art doesn't necessarily always appreciate. I have found that if you buy right and you've done your homework, and that's a topic for a whole nother panel, but if you've done your homework, the art will hold its value. Now, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. And yes, I've suffered some tremendous losses because buying art is a speculative investment. That's why I'm recommending 10% of your portfolio, not 90%. But I've been very fortunate with lower dollar works holding their value. And I have found that my lower dollar works have generally outperformed some of my blue chip works. So these works that Richard is selling, these artists that may not have a long CV, I have been very, very pleased with their trajectory. If you can buy a great work of art and it brings you immense joy, it literally transforms your soul, and 10 years after you buy it, or 20 years, you can sell it for what you paid for it, my God, you've come out a winner. Oh, and for the artist in the room, in case this doesn't come up in a question, I have one piece of advice, and it's a quote from the noted gallerist Richard Fagan. Anytime you sell, you've made a mistake. And what I mean by that is just what it says. Hold on to that work. When you think that it's appreciated 2 or 3 times and you're tempted to sell it, like I have always done, don't, because it's just going to keep going up. So hold, hold, hold. This is not day trading.
Well, can I?
Please.
Here's one of the things that I will say is that when you have an artist who has an established secondary market, you don't have to sell the work. You can leverage it for a loan. Yeah. And I'm not recommending that you do that, but it is an option, where you can actually secure it, take out a loan on it. I believe you can anywhere from 50 to 60%. And the beauty of that is that you're not paying any capital gains tax on it because you're not actually selling the work. You're using it to leverage a loan. And then the interest that you pay on it is actually tax deductible too. And that is the kind of, so like just think about it. If you purchase a work for $20,000 and then it increases in value to say $200,000 and then you can take a loan out on it. A lot of the clients that I work with, that's what they do. They leverage their art to secure a loan, and then they take the money and they reinvest it into purchasing more art of emerging artists.
And not every bank, my bank in particular, does not give credit to art. So if you're interested in taking a loan on a work of art and your bank says, no, we don't take art as collateral, but just pick up the phone and reestablish your relationship with another bank. Because more and more banks, 10 years ago, that was pretty much unknown, unheard of. But now, the bigger banks, they have huge art departments. I mean, it's incredible.
And Lester, I actually want you to speak to this because from a conversation that we've had recently, how important is it to keep track, to keep record from the beginning of you collecting, so that when you're at the end of collecting, you say, I'm not collecting anymore. This is it. I have my collection. This is for my estate. You don't have to track back and try to find all of those records.
Well, I can answer that from both a collector's perspective and an artist's perspective. I am an artist also. Okay, first as a collector, it's just vitally important. I'm one of the most disorganized people in this room. But I do, and so while I don't have a concise system, what I do have is a system. I have multiple systems. Maybe that's the problem. But I have a hard copy folder and a computer folder, and then a third folder. The first folder is for the purchase, and the third folder is for miscellaneous articles that I find on that artist. So it's just really critically important that you keep accurate records from the very get-go, no matter what the price. I mentioned a moment ago that I just recently bought a piece of art for $250. I gave the artist the $250. I wrote him a check right on the spot, and I said, listen, though, I need you to send me an invoice. I want to have a file on every artist. I don't care if it's a $50 piece of art. I want to have a file. And for artists, it's equally important that you keep records of each and every sale, every detail of that sale. It might not seem like a big deal if you're just beginning, but as time goes on, those records will become invaluable to you.
I want to say we could go on, and it would take an individual conversation with each one of you to really dig into the core parts of the parts you play within this ecosystem. This conversation is titled, Don't Just Buy Art, Build Wealth. I want to know what that statement actually means to each and every one of you. And you can go first, Aisha.
My partner and I were having a conversation, and she put it into a Venn diagram that actually really made it make sense for me. I think that as thinking as a collector, and Richard can certainly answer this as a dealer and collector, I think that there's a few things that are required to build a valuable collection, and you can take value either financially, aesthetically, or otherwise. I always say those three things. Obviously, you need financial capital, right? Money, right? Like art is not cheap. I mean, it sounds like Lester is fine picking up $250 pieces, but I've not found that blessing. So you need obviously financial capital. The other piece is social capital, right? Like, who is, how are you, Dr. Joy was a massive infusion of social capital for me. She basically put me in rooms that I otherwise would not have gotten into, right? So social capital, I mean, I don't know if y'all have been collecting and you've heard a gallery say, tell us about your collection. I'm like, look, I got the money. What are we talking about here? So there's this component of social capital that's required to get access to certain works. And the other piece of it is intellectual capital, right? The intellectual capital is, am I working with an advisor, or am I working with a gallery like Richard that has just a strong eye for talent? Some amazing artists have come through Richard's program. In fact, I think one of the best living painters came through your program. Richard, I don't think we've talked about him, but I think Jazz Knight is one of the best black, white, whatever painters, like, living this earth. Like, I'm talking John Singer Sargent level painter, and came through your program, right? And I think that one of his major collectors, Peggy Cooper Caffritz, she acquired his works through, I think, you, right? And, he ends up going in her book, and she was a massive patron. So I think, having the intellectual capital, meaning you've got either the folks who are guiding you into those right spaces, advising you. I think operating on all of those cylinders, financial capital, intellectual capital, social capital, really help put you in a position of building the wealth that ultimately becomes a solid and valuable collection.
Right. And Richard, the same question to you.
For me, it comes from an economic standpoint. And understanding as a gallerist and a black-owned gallerist how difficult it has been to be able to scale up, you know. So, and also looking at this industry and seeing that, you know, within the last 5 years, there's been a lot more opportunities that have been created for artists of color, but I don't see those opportunities being created in other capacities within the art world. You know, like, where are the directors, where are the curators, where are the art writers, where are these jobs that are created within this ecosystem that are not existing for people of color when a lot of money is being made and generated? You know, so we're continually creating and we're also building, but we're not the ones that are benefiting from the monetization of it. You know, also being a major player. You know, it's expensive to be able to participate in these art fairs, you know, but the first obstacle that you have to overcome is your application even going to be accepted into these fairs? I remember the first 3 times we applied for the Armory, we didn't get accepted. But Phyllis Stevens and Genesis Tremaine, who both came through our program, were exhibiting that year with Almeen Reich Gallery. But we were rejected. And the artist that we were rejected with was Marcus Jansen, who had the strongest CV. You know, so it's important for a gallery such as mine to be able to compete on that level because it gives us an access to collectors that we typically don't have, but it also brings some credibility to what we're doing because the artists want to be able to have that opportunity to be able to have their works featured on that stage, you know, on those major art fairs. You know, so when we're talking about collectors and acquiring works, you really can't forget the black-owned galleries because we are this place where artists are being identified and being given these opportunities when these other galleries are not even considering them. You know, like, would there be a Bisa Butler? I don't know, but I do know that she came through our program. And I do know at the time, an African-American female textile artist was not in conversation when it came to the contemporary fine art world. Yeah. You know, would there have been a Genesis Tremaine who walked into my gallery off the street and asked me if I would be interested in taking a look at her portfolio, and now I believe her work is in 12 major museum collections, and one work at one point, there was a work that I sold for $15,000 that 3 years later sold at auction for $450,000. You know, Nathaniel Mary Quinn, you know, would he have had the trajectory that he had if it were not for myself and being able to take collectors from the community when he was really struggling to sell his work, and those sales helped him to continue to pursue his craft and his passion until a gallery outside of the community recognizes him and identified him. So I would say is that this talent is coming through galleries that are owned by people of color, and unfortunately far too often we're not taking the time to be able to look at these galleries and see the value of them and looking to acquire the work. I'll tell one story and then I'll stop. I was at Gagosian for Nathaniel's first solo show, and this woman, sister, comes out of the gallery and she's in tears. And I say to her, I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I'm so frustrated because I want a Nathaniel Mary Quinn work and I can't get it. Doesn't matter how much money I have, it's the social capital, right? It's who you know." So we sat down, we talked for about 10 minutes, and I said, "Well, you know, I used to work with Nathaniel." I said, "But I have another artist that I think that may be of interest to you." And she said, "What's the artist's name?" And I said, "It's Genesis Tremaine." And we went back and forth, and she didn't acquire the work. And then I developed a relationship with Almeen Reich Gallery, and the relationship I had with them was a dual representation with Genesis Tremaine. So part of the agreement that we had was that all of the works were consigned through my gallery, so my gallery got a percentage of every sale. And not only did we get a percentage of the sale, but we got the name of the collectors. That woman who would not acquire the work for me went to Almeen and paid 10 times more for that piece and got it through Almeen, because that validation to her, I guess, meant that this was an artist of significance. But if you look at the history of these artists, a lot of these artists are coming through galleries that are right in your backyard, but we're overlooking them for whatever reason, and we have to stop doing that. So that, for me, is the whole idea around the economic aspect of the art world, is that we have to focus on the circulation of our dollars more and pouring into these programs that are identifying these artists, because if these galleries cease to exist, where are these artists going to get their first opportunities from?
Richard, you said something that made me think about, I've worked in e-commerce, and we often talked about customer acquisition. Rarely do I hear the term or any relation to it in the space of galleries talking about collector acquisition. Could you speak to that for a little bit, about what that actually looks like for you, acquiring collectors?
In what sense of acquiring collectors?
Actually having them become a client.
Having them become a client. So the major African American collectors, it's been extremely difficult to get them to support my program. Even with the success that we've had, so the collectors that we've been really successful with are the ones that we've developed, and we've introduced them into collecting art. We've been fortunate that over time, because of our success with the artists that have come through the program, but it still is a really difficult task. I can't tell you, like Bisa Butler, when she was with the gallery, we weren't able to get any museum acquisitions. We weren't able to get the curators and the directors to come out to the gallery, and even with the other artists that we worked with. But as soon as those artists leave and move on to other programs, unfortunately, outside of our community, then there's this heightened level of interest. And the one thing that we know about artists is that they want to be amongst their peers. They understand how important it is for their works to be included in major exhibitions, and especially institutions. So it's been a challenge, but because of our success, we continue to push forward, and collectors like Aisha, and having these conversations about the importance of them, not only advocating for the artists, but advocating for the galleries. Because if a gallery such as mine, who was the first to really invest in those artists, and then we're not able to develop these relationships with important individuals in the art world when they're looking to acquire a work and donate it to a museum, that goes a long way, because it says now to the next group of artists that are coming along that this is a really reputable gallery that is making moves that are going to be beneficial towards our career.
I have a question that's your question, because I'm very curious about the answer. Richard, about that collector acquisition strategy, I don't think I've ever heard of a dealer sharing the list of buyers with another
Neither
gallery,
have I.
right? So I know how much those email marketing lists are that's money, right?
Yes.
And I think that's where you were going with the e-commerce question. So,
yes.
I've heard from artists my gallery won't tell me who bought my work, right? So and that's for whatever reason, and I get sometimes galleries are suddenly you're gonna be selling out your studio to so I get the why. But Richard, can you talk about how Almeen basically shared whoever bought Genesis works, right? So can you share how important that is, how often that happens, and just the value of getting that collector list?
So I'll say this, my gallery, we share the name of the collectors with every artist that we represent. That's always been a practice that we have. I remember I was listening to a conversation with Jacob Lawrence, and they were doing a retrospective exhibition of some of his earlier works, and he was talking about the challenges that he was having in locating those works. So from that conversation, I made a decision right there that I would always share the names of the collectors with the artists, so that they had that, they knew where their works were if it ever was a situation where they needed to know where those works lied. So when negotiating, whenever there was an artist that worked with my gallery and there was some sort of dual representation with the gallery larger, I always negotiated their early contracts. And one of the things that was negotiated is that we needed to know who was acquiring the work. And we also made certain that a certain percentage of collectors of color would have access to those works too. You know, so that we knew that those works were also going to be placed with collectors that were from our community, you know, and knowing that these artists had a certain trajectory and that the value of the work was going to increase, so we wanted to build wealth also within our community. And the importance of that is knowing where the works are, knowing who's acquiring the works. And then for me as a gallery, it also helped to build our collector base, you know, because now we knew who these individuals were, and we could follow up with them. And also, if it was a situation where maybe there was a work that we wanted to have loaned to an institution, you need to know where the works are.
Sharing that type of data is unheard of in any industry.
You know, sometimes all you have to do is. But what was important with that was that at that particular time, so many artists of color will leave these galleries that they work with when these opportunities are presented to them. I was fortunate enough to have strong enough relationships with some of these artists where it wasn't a situation where they were told, if you continue to work with Richard Beaver's gallery, then we can't represent you. They came with the understanding that they were going to continue to work with our gallery.
So Lester, for you, that same question, what does that statement mean for you?
Wealth, I believe, has two components. There's financial wealth and there's cultural wealth. And I believe these three have very beautifully outlined the aspects of financial wealth. I'm going to speak for just a moment to close on cultural wealth. The cultural wealth is what has made me the person that I am today. To me, art collecting is the cultural wealth. The part of it is about looking and looking hard. It's about thinking. It's about believing. It's about understanding that art has the power to transform. Art has the power to right social justice. Art has the power to take you on a journey, a perceptual journey, a psychological journey, a religious journey. And I hope that on one of these journeys, the art is able to help you more easily perceive the beauty and the wonder and the ugliness in the world around us. And that, my friends, is the cultural wealth that I have gained. That's why I feel rich today sitting here.
Thank you so much, Lester. And thank the three of y'all. I appreciate you guys from the bottom of my heart. So we're going to open it up to audience questions. We're only going to spend about 10 minutes because we have gone well beyond what we were supposed to. Jordan, thank you so much.
I'm coming over there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diamond. I also go by DJM. I'm an artist and an independent curator, and I have like a two-part question. When y'all were speaking to the CVs, as an artist, I am not degreed or don't have an MFA behind my name. I was self-taught, but I've been doing it for 15 years, and I find it hard to get into more established showings, gallery exhibitions, to even be considered by galleries. As a curator, it's also hard to get galleries to consider certain artists. Some of them are not accepting new artists because they don't have a CV or things of that nature. What can you suggest to us as artists to help us build a stronger CV when we don't necessarily have access to the right opportunities?
I mean, I'll for me, many of the artists that I've acquired don't have formal training. and that's okay. I really just want to make sure that they're a student of their craft. Like, you know, are you how focused are you on your practice? You know, how much are you working in your studio? There are other ways to build a CV, right? You know, I know artists that operate completely independently. They've put on their own solo shows or group shows with other fellow artists. Other ways to build your CV and really build and establish relationships would be through residency programs, both formal and informal residencies. You know, connecting and networking with collectors. I have an artist that I'm supporting, and he's struggling a bit, mostly because he's kind of hell bent on what he wants to do. So I had an informal residency at my home. We flew him from New York. He stayed at our house for a week. He did some paintings around the house. So networking with collectors gets you some of those opportunities. That you can put on your CV. So I don't think that you've got to wait for opportunities to open, or open doors for you. I think that there are some things that you can do, and maybe you've already done some solo shows or hosted your own independent shows.
Yes, that's the second part of the question. So as a curator, no, thank you. That was the best answer. As an independent curator, I curate mostly in non-traditional spaces. I've been doing it for 10 years, and I find it hard to get legitimate collectors. I've had the pleasure of introducing collectors to emerging artists, getting collectors their first piece and things like that. So that's been a pleasure. But how can I attract more legitimate collectors to these shows with these emerging artists that are my peers, to get them these connections and to further our careers in that fashion?
I think Richard would be a great, as a dealer, and you I think that's a good.
First, I would say that begin to build relationships with galleries. You know, if you can come in as a guest curator at a gallery, that will open you up to a larger market, and you would have access to collectors. I would also say is research the galleries. You know, a lot of times artists are reaching out to galleries where the work that they represent or carry is not in the same genre or, theme or mediums in which they work. So that's really, really important. I can't tell you how many submissions that we get, and I can tell that they didn't do their research. That they just literally clicked a button and sent their portfolio to as many galleries as they possibly could. Go out to the art fairs. Let the directors at these galleries be able to put a face with your name. Begin to build relationships with them. Once you identify these galleries and the ones that you think that you're interested in, that you feel would be a good fit for the artists that you work with, and then from you from a curatorial practice, invite them out for coffee, invite them out for lunch, relationship building, and then I guarantee you it'll begin to open some doors for you.
Yes, greetings, Mr. Beavers. You spoke of young emerging artists. Well, I'm an old emerging artist, and where does that leave me in this conversation?
You're in the conversation. It's not age. I don't associate age with where an artist is in their career. One of the things that my gallery is known for is being kind of outside of the norms and not traditional in the sense. Talent is talent. There's an artist that I work with, Phyllis Stevens. She's not an emerging artist, but she's a master quilt maker. But when we started working together, I knew that her career wasn't where it potentially could be or should be. So I'd love to see your portfolio.
Never
ever give up.
Never lose faith.
Yeah.
The work I purchased at the art fair last night, the artist is 91, and while she's not just beginning, she's reaching the pinnacle now, and really she didn't start a serious practice until she was in her 60s. So age is definitely not a deterrent.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, one of the artist that I worked with, who was a dear friend of mine, and I believe she didn't start actually her art career until she was, I believe, in her 60s, was Annie Lee. And Annie Lee and I worked together very early on in my career when I first opened the gallery. You know, so it's never too late.
Okay.
You even have more of a story to tell.
Thank you.
Another question here.
Hi, everybody. Don Trey Scott. I'm an endodontist here in the Houston Heights area. So I'm at the big age now, 40. I got an estate plan and all that. So I want to know, I get a work, that I've acquired. What are the exact steps that I should take to preserve my wealth or build my wealth when I get that work? Are there specific steps that you recommend that we take once we acquire the pieces?
Well, like I said, the most, I don't know if it's the most important thing, but documentation, preservation, is what type of work? Painting, sculpture, drawing? Okay. The reason I ask is because you want to take care of the work. You want to make sure it's not overly exposed to light. Depending on the work, it might be light sensitive. It might be moisture sensitive. It might be kid or animal unfriendly. So you want to treat it as you would treat any fine asset, and again, documentation is all important.
I'll add to that, insure it. I have a fine art policy. Up to like a certain limit, you can put it on your homeowner's insurance. And then once you exceed a certain number, this was at least for my policy, I got a separate fine art policy. So, I would say in addition to making sure you're taking care of the art, making sure you're protecting yourself and your wealth in the event that something were to happen to it.
And I just changed insurance agencies. If you are in a position where you're insuring your work, especially if it's under your homeowner's policy, be very sure that you understand what perils it's insured for and what perils it's not insured for. If it's a scheduled work of art, which means that you are insuring that work of art on its own, it's generally insured under all perils. But even then, for instance, my prior carrier, if I sent a work out to be framed, it was not insured unless I notified the carrier and received their authorization. The carrier I'm with now is worldwide coverage. Doesn't matter if I want to lend it out, doesn't matter if I want to have it reframed, it's insured. So, it's boring as hell, but read the fine details.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like depending on the value of the work, you want to get a certified appraiser, and it's called an art writer, because sometimes with the homeowner's policy, you won't get the replacement value of the work. So meaning that if you purchase it at a certain price point, as the work appreciates in value, you want to make certain that the art writer and the insurance is going to cover replacement value.
We have one question here. We'll have time for 2 more questions after this.
Good evening. My name is Raquel Simone. My question is actually for each of the panelists. And can you hear me? We spent the evening talking about building wealth for collectors, and it made me think about how this strategy could or should work for building wealth for the artist. And so I was hoping each of you would share your opinion on artist resale royalties and the idea of fractional equity models.
That's a great question. So one of the things that I've done, most of my art I've acquired individually, but I've also done some collective acquisitions. I'm all about collective economics. So in cases, there have been like maybe a group of us where we've acquired and donated work. And then there are instances, I think there's maybe 2 or 3 instances where a group of us have acquired a work, and the artist is like the 10th partner, which I love because if the artist is a part of the ownership as the work appreciates, and what we typically do is we tend to just lend the work out. It's usually not in any of the collectors' homes. So we've got a Robert Peterson that's currently, I think it's in Wichita right now at their art museum. We've got Harmonia Rosales work that has gone from Spellman's Museum. We've loaned it to, I think it's on loan somewhere. I don't even know where it's on loan right now. So, so generally we will ask, not every artist says yes, but generally we'll ask the artists to be one of the members of the work so they can benefit in the appreciation. An artist, I became actually from an event that Dr. Joy had at her home, Alterance Gumby. So one of the things I got is becoming an executive producer on his documentary. I got a piece of art, but with that art came this like rider in his contract, and I don't understand like the exchange, like whatever that crypto thing is, like what like it's kind of documented on there. Where blockchain, yeah. So it's somewhere on that blockchain that if the art appreciates, he gets a percentage, and I was totally fine with that. Oftentimes you see works that appreciate and sell for millions later, and you're like, dang, the artist didn't get anything out of that. And it's for me, thinking about how much artists do and the work they do, and how often most of them struggle for most of their professional careers. It's important to me to make sure that we include them in any upside potential. It's also one of the reasons why, from an economic standpoint, it's also one of the reasons why it's important for me to help them either network with curators or also place them in institutions. Because for me, that is, while not putting money in their pocket, could potentially help the value of their work as I strengthen their CVs.
I'm sorry, we have one more question.
Anybody else want to add to that question from Raquel? Okay,
Raquel, you always ask the best questions.
Okay, last question.
How y'all doing? My name is Hopeton St. Clair Hibbett. I'm a mixed media sculpture artist out of Atlanta. I just had a question as someone who has a pretty long 2-page CV and has some accomplishments. What do you guys say determines an emerging artist from a mid-level artist and the different levels of artists, and what would you say are the accomplishments that may separate you from those levels?
I would like to see a strong Instagram presence. I'd like to see a strong vision. I'd like to see strong technique. I'd like to see branding. I'd like to see self-motivation. I'd like to see articulateness, which you have, as you beautifully phrased the question. It sounds to me like you're on your way there, or you're already there.
I actually don't know what, I guess, the technical definition of what, when you're no longer emerging and when you're mid-career. For me, when I'm looking at a CV, it's not really to put them in put an artist in a box on what they should be categorized. I'm more so looking, how strong is the CV relative to what the artist is charging in terms of acquiring a work. So for me, if I'm looking at I'm looking at the work first, so I like the work, then I'm looking at the CV, and then from the CV, I'm determining based on residencies they've done, group institutional shows they've shown in, or solo institutional shows they've shown in, group gallery exhibitions or solo gallery exhibitions. That for me, just residencies, that as I'm scanning down that, I'm not really trying to determine whether or not the artist should be placed either emerging or mid-career or late career. I'm trying to determine, does the CV warrant the acquisition price?
Yeah, and to elaborate on that, I would say, where have you exhibited, which galleries, group shows, art fairs that you've participated in? Is it comparable to where you're pricing your work?
Just thank you guys for being here this evening. I know that they could go on because you guys have so much knowledge to share, and we just can't do it in an hour and a half, and that breaks my heart. So I'm gonna publicly invite Lester. We're gonna do our thing. Aisha, we already have something planned, and Richard, we've been trying to get on each other's. I could get Richard to Houston before I could get him on Zoom. And that's just crazy. So I appreciate each and every one of y'all for coming to GloryLand and being a part of this conversation. This is such a layered conversation, and I'm sure you all have questions. Y'all email me y'all's questions, and I'm gonna email them to them. If we get lucky, they'll answer one of them, two of them. They have busy lives and busy schedules. But thank you guys for coming out. We're gonna actually move down to the lounge for the social hour. So feel free to come down there and have a drink, decompress a little bit. We just talked about money for 2 hours. I'm stressed out. All right, well, thank y'all for being here. I want to take a moment to thank the incredible partners who made GloryLand possible. Our hospitality partner, Hotel St. Augustine, for creating a home for these conversations and a home for our guests. Paper City Magazine and Catherine Anspon for amplifying Houston's culture in storytelling and telling the story of GloryLand. Swing Shot Studios for the beautiful furniture, who also has 2 photography studios in Houston. Houston Arts Alliance for their support, their incredible support of artists and creative communities. Who's Who PR for shaping and helping bring this event to life. Emergence for the vision behind the scenes. And of course, Untitled Art for believing in what we're building. Eric J., who brought the look of the event to life. I couldn't have done any of this without him. The volunteers, oh my goodness. It's such a blessing to have people in your corner. And the host committee, filled with artists, curators, creators, and builders here in Houston. Together, they all help turn an idea into an experience. And I'm beyond and deeply grateful for everyone who played a part in making GloryLand. Now, I want you to know there are 2 more conversations from that weekend that will be available exclusively on my Patreon. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like and share. It really helps us grow Dear Glory and be able to lead towards a bigger and a better GloryLand. And it helps us keep these stories and these insights coming for you guys. Now, what I hope you take away from this conversation is that wealth, real wealth, is not just about what you own. It's about what you build, what you share, and the communities that you invest in. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Dear Glory. Subscribing, liking, sharing, it doesn't just grow this channel. It helps us expand Dear Glory. It helps people that we want to partner with see the value in our community and the folks that's watching, the value in me, the value in you guys. And it allows us to keep going and grow this into something a lot bigger so that we can continue sharing stories, sharing insights, so you guys can continue having the information to grow your collections and to grow your career. Now, if you haven't checked out the other panel that lives here on this channel, Artist Power, Are You Using Yours? Between Evita Tizano, Amari Gibson, Dr. Joy Simmons. Go watch that next. The link is above. I want you guys to always remember, glory is not just a moment. It's a process. And it's about the journey that gets us to the glory. And then it's about us leaving those doors open so others can walk through. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.